John McGlynn.
We apologise enormously for the distress that we've brought to our fans, our sponsors, anyone that we've hurt in any way at all. It was never our intention to do that. You know, I've been at a football club now going for the best part of 9 years on two separate occasions, and there's no way that I would have wanted to have brought the last 10 days to the football club more on the front page for the wrong reasons than we are on the back page. So really here to apologise for bringing our football club, our supporters into the situation that we find ourselves in.
He sounds distinctly uncomfortable, Leanne, and so he should.
Absolutely, yeah, but it's little too late, I think, in my opinion. I would have liked to have heard from John McGlynn last week when this was at the height of the news and, you know, the talking points that were going on, before the people at Raith Rovers had to suffer what they suffered, and before other, you know, people in the public eye had to make a statement and come out and speak and try and salvage this situation. But I'm really shocked at John McGlynn, and you know, he's a manager that I've looked at a lot in the last number of years, been across the Championship. In terms of football, I thought he was doing a really good job, but this is just, for me, I think his position's untenable.
He would love, clearly, to be able to rewind the tape.
We apologise. Now, we just completely underestimated the feeling and the depth of the feeling that has come from that signing. We did not anticipate that at all, and it is with much regret for everyone involved that we find ourselves in this situation. If we could turn the clock back for everyone's point of view, we would do it in a minute, an absolute minute, because it's not been great for anyone. Everyone's lost here. There's no winners in this. So, but from a footballing point of view, yeah, and our aim maybe took over from the other side, which is the non-footballing side, and our ambition. And there's nothing wrong with ambition, but we've obviously hurt a lot of people, and we apologise to each and every one of them.
Failures to read the room, Craig, don't come much worse than that, do they? Massively, Rob. I mean, everybody that was involved in that process that actually approved this signing in the first place, I kind of agree with Leanne. I think that they're in a position where, you know, their roles should be seriously looked at. Potentially these people should be standing down, if not being relieved of their duties. I think that this was a really, really poor choice. You know, to the fans, the supporters of that football club, but more importantly, the broader society, this is something that I think it just was a really, really poor message. And unfortunately, what comes over, and even in the back of John's interview at the back end there, it got switched back to football and winning. And for me that's poor, because football is so much more than that. It brings a lot of joy to people, but at the same time, there's values. There's certain things that just certainly cannot be acceptable in terms of you know, things that happen. And clubs need to be the leaders to really set the standard. And there was enough noise in the earlier part of this to suggest that it was a really, really bad idea. And now they're having to backtrack a little bit. So in terms of reading the room, completely got that wrong. And you would imagine that, Leanne, until everyone who was involved in that decision is removed, there's going to be no return to anything like normality for Raith Rovers, and they've got big financial issues, obviously, on the back of this. Yeah, and I think the biggest bit for me is that they clearly did prioritise winning over any sort of morality and values in life. Football should never have come into it. It should never have been a consideration. And I think whilst the majority of those people remain within that football club, I think it will almost be impossible to regain any sort of trust. And John McGlynn speaks here about building bridges. I don't know how that's possible, because if you're a fan that has really walked away from that club, or you're a stakeholder within it that has felt the need to go and retract any sort of investment that you've had, how do you then go and reinvest that interest, whether it be from a financial perspective or an emotional perspective, when the same people remain
within the club. So I think John McGlynn has made it clear that winning for him and trying to get Raith Rovers up a division was much more important to him than any other aspects of what that decision-making process should have looked like. And I think that probably this statement today and coming out and speaking about it will actually just raise another couple of red flags, that people will now begin to understand that John McGlynn was actually part of that decision-making process, and he's quite happily discussing it and making it clear that he got it wrong.
I'm not sure who was advising Raith Rovers at the time, or whether they just ignored any outside advice that was coming their way. But I mean, massively damaging, and it just underlines how much a football club like Raith Rovers is the centre of a community in Kirkcaldy. So it's so important that there are so many connections to the club. You know, most people in Kirkcaldy, it's not that big a place that probably in most households will have some sort of connection to the club. It's the heartbeat of the community, and you know, maybe this is a reminder to us all about the importance of a football club, and it's not just about winning games.
No, for me, it is much more than that. I mean, yes, football gives a lot of happiness to a lot of people who support our great game, but you need to, Leanne's touched, you need to have morals, you need to have values, you need to have good culture, and unacceptable behaviour, no matter what that is, it needs to be deemed unacceptable, and therefore not making decisions to show that, okay, well, that's going to be okay at our football club. For me, as soon as you set that tone, then damage limitation, you lose the trust of your potential sponsors, current sponsors, the supporter base, as you touch on when you go to those kind of smaller clubs, Rob, but they're really strong communities. You really, I think, take the risk of tearing a football club apart.
Mm-hmm. I think the bit that I find frustrating as well, Rob, when I listen to all, is a lot of the justification seems to be going back to the fact that, you know, the player had played for 5 years with another club, and I think that at no point was that ignored, and I think that's what people are getting away from, and at no point did people fully appreciate or accept that that was the right thing either. And whether that's what Raith Rovers had managed to convince themselves, that because that had happened for 5 years that it would be okay for Raith Rovers to also make that same decision. I think if anything it probably shows you how far we've come in that 5 years, that actually people now feel that there's enough voice and people feel empowered enough to actually stand up and say, you know, wholeheartedly, I do not agree with that decision and this is how I will act. And that actually carried quite a lot of weight this time round. Whereas I think those people that spoke out in 2017 and that took a presidented stance against it, there wasn't enough support and there wasn't enough backing. And for 5 years, it's probably been able to just fizzle out and everybody just got on with their day job and literally, you know, it was status quo. It's changed now and it's not acceptable. And there's been a lot of other things this week, certainly in the news, that, you know, have come to light in terms of that responsibility that football clubs have, as sports people do have. It's not like any other job. You're in the public eye and you've got a duty and a responsibility to behave and go about life in a certain way. And at the point that doesn't happen, we need to call out that type of behaviour. The
explanation about Kurt Zouma playing for West Ham the other night, given by Davy Moyes, was, it's for football reasons. You know, he is part of our best team. We need him if we're going to win the game. We need him if we're going to qualify for the top four. Mm-hmm. And it just seemed a bit too easy to be sweeping aside the ethics and the morals of that horrific video that was posted of Zouma kicking his cat.
But again, Robert, it kind of comes back a little bit like the race situation. It's like, this player is important for us to win this football match. And I think, unfortunately for me, I think Moyes has let himself down there because, and again, as a football club, but as a manager, you're the face of that football club, and to say that it's more about, we need this player no matter what they've done. Yeah, we need this player to go and win a game of football. I think is not a great example, and certainly in terms of the supporters and the football club, it's just not a good look. Like I said, I'm sure there's all the supporters that are supporting West Ham thinking that was the wrong choice. But again, you're going like, how is he given the start after all the publicity and obviously clearly seeing that he's done the wrong thing? I think you've really got to stand up and be strong, and make the tough decisions. You know, you just got to make the right call. You know, you talk about being good to people and being treated the way that you'd expect to be treated yourself. It's the same with animals, like, you know, and the behaviour needs to be called out. And I just felt that West Ham certainly didn't act upon it in the right way.
Is there too much around the football world being brushed under the carpet, Leanne?
Yeah, for me, 100%. I think sport generally, I've spoke a lot about it just now, and even in terms of my degree just now, it's a lot of the stuff that I focus on and discussing is morality in sport, and I think it lacks it right across the globe. It lacks it. You look at a lot of the decision making that happens, a lot of the scenarios that we discuss in terms of nations that, you know, get host tournaments and certain things that go on and certain things that we just almost accept, and you use sport in that sports washing way where you use it as a distraction from everything else that goes on. And I think that that's where a lot of, probably narrowing it down just now at football clubs, is that they're happy to run that risk of, you know, we'll take the gamble because if we win, if there's success, people will forget about it. You know, and David Moyes, for example, made that decision by playing Kurt Zouma. He thought if you get the result and you get the points, the fans won't care. They might have been upset about it today, but if the club does well, if you go and get a Champions League, but at what point do we say that's not acceptable? You know, and I think we need to keep having these discussions and speaking about these moments, and it's not about witch hunts, it's not about going after certain individuals, it's about recognising the position that we all have, and that, you know, can be a really strong and powerful one where you can actually impact people's lives for the better, that you can send clear messages, especially to young people, about what life looks like and the challenges that you might face and the things that are right and the things that are wrong. And certainly as a person that has a voice and, you know, a public image like most sports people do have, you need to use that in the correct way.